All right. Why don't we go ahead and get started today? So good morning, everyone, and welcome to our 100 Days of 100% Renewable Electricity webinar. My name's Stephen King, and I'm Environment California's Clean Energy Advocate. Environment California is a statewide advocacy group that works for clean air, clean water, clean energy, wildlife and open spaces, and a livable climate. We're thrilled to host this webinar today, highlighting an upcoming clean energy milestone in California, and to discuss why we must continue to adopt policies that keep clean energy growing quickly in California and throughout the country. I'm pleased to be joined this morning by Johanna Newman, Environment America's Senior Director of the Campaign for 100% Renewable Electricity, and Dr. Mark Jacobson, Professor and Director of Stanford's Atmosphere and Energy Program. Later in the hour, we'll also be joined by Dan Jacobson, Environment California's Senior Advisor. And now on to the big news. For almost every day this spring and many days this summer, California's renewable energy generation from sources such as solar and wind has met 100% of our electricity demand for a portion of each day. That's nearly 100 days of reaching 100% renewable electricity in the Golden State. As of today, we've reached 100% renewable electricity on 98 of the last 125 days, an incredible testament to the progress of our clean energy transition so far. Thanks to Dr. Jacobson's work in tracking this milestone, we've seen this progress play out over the last few months as renewable sources have completely powered our electric grid during notable portions of the day. This fast approaching 100-day milestone reminds us that we've made a lot of progress to date, but there's still much we need to do in order to generate renewable electricity at all hours of the day. For decades, Environment California has worked to advance renewable energy solutions that cut global warming pollution and our dependence on fossil fuels, reduce air pollution, promote healthier communities, and put us on a faster path towards 100% clean energy. From winning the state's first million solar roofs commitment in the early 2000s, to passing the state's 100% clean energy law in 2018, we're inspired to see that goal setting is now starting to produce the intended results of having renewable sources fully meet our electricity demand for portions of the day. This marks a major step toward realizing our vision of clean energy all day, every day in California. And we're looking forward to a deeper discussion of what this milestone means for California and other states, how we got here, and where we go from here to meet our urgent climate and clean energy goals. And just to reiterate, we have the ability to power our lives with abundant, clean, renewable energy from the sun and the wind, and to store much of that energy in batteries that can be used to power our homes and our lives during the evening and nighttime hours as well. With that, I'll turn it over to Johanna Newman, who will get us started and moderate our conversation on 100 days of 100% renewable electricity this morning. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Stephen. It's really great to be here. My name is Johanna Newman, and I am the Senior Director of the Campaign for 100% Renewable Energy at Environment America, which is the national federation of which Environment California is a part of. And in my role, I've worked with our state staff in California and subsequently other states all across the country to set 100% clean energy commitments at the state level. Vermont actually just became the 13th state to make a 100% clean energy commitment. So, so much of that work started in California. And so I do think the eyes of the nation and the eyes of the world are on California, cheering on the progress and, eager and excited to see what is next in the Golden State. And Dr. Jacobson, it's just great to be in this conversation with you again to celebrate this milestone. And I was hoping you could just share a little bit about the significance of the milestone of, we're at 98 days where we've gotten at least some of our power from 100% renewable. How significant is this? And in particular, in relation to the goals that California has set for itself?
Yeah, thank you, Johanna, and thank you, Stephen, for introducing this. So I've been tracking California's progress going to 100% renewables, and more particularly 100% what I call wind, water, solar, which is in this case onshore wind in California, solar photovoltaics mostly. These are utility scale and also some concentrated solar power. California also has geothermal electricity, which we consider clean and renewable. And then there's small hydropower, which is mostly run of the river, and then large hydropower. And we did this, and we're tracking the main grid in California called the CAISO grid, California Independent System Operator grid, which represents about 80% of California's grid plus part of Nevada. And that since March 7th of this year, we've had 98 days out of the last 125 days. And then so that's part of the end of winter, all of spring, and early summer. Now we're getting into kind of midsummer, and temperatures are higher now. And so for the last several days, we haven't met 100%, just because the demand for air conditioning in particular has skyrocketed. And the temperatures this year are actually much higher than last year. On average, for the same 4 months this year, there's 5% higher throughout California than last year. And in June, it's even worse. But nevertheless, despite these higher temperatures this year and greater air conditioning demand, there are still 50 more days so far that we've met 100% renewables this year, for at least a few minutes to hours each day. In fact, it's an average over 125 days. Even if they didn't meet 100%, we've averaged 4.5 hours per day of 100% renewables or more. In fact, it's gotten up to 160% on one particular moment, or a few minutes in time, over 160% renewables. But we're exceeding 100% renewables, and the excess is used either to charge batteries, which we have a record amount of batteries on the grid now, or it's used is exported to out of state. And so it's not wasted, most of it. There is some that is curtailed and wasted, but most of it is actually being used to then power the grid at night. So wind is 24/7. So you see the wind is powering California all day, hours of the day. So is hydro, and so is geothermal. Hydro is more flexible, and it can be controlled, and you can shift more of it to night, which we want to do as we grow the grid. That's the conventional hydro, that is. Whereas geothermal and wind are pretty much, you're going to get them when you do get them, but they're pretty steady when you look at the data, day and night. Solar is during the day, but to shift, and we have a huge amount of solar. So the greatest portion of the renewables being met is from solar photovoltaics at the utility scale. Now, in addition, there's a huge growth of rooftop solar last year. Now, this year in 2024, there's a drop in the growth of rooftop solar due to the change in net metering law. But last year there was a huge growth. And so for all of spring, there was a 3% lower energy demand, despite the higher temperatures in California, because of this huge growth of rooftop solar. Because rooftop solar is used immediately to reduce use for people's own electricity in their homes and buildings. And so that reduces grid demand for electricity. So you see during the day a drop in demand during the spring, even though temperatures were higher. So there was more air conditioning demand, but a lot of that was met by rooftop solar. And so there's a drop in demand combined with a 30% increase of solar supply, grid scale solar supply, utility scale photovoltaics mostly, plus about 10% higher wind output this year. There was lower hydro output by about 6%. There was lower geothermal output by about 12%, and lower run-of-the-river hydro output by about 12% as well. I mean, last year was a record hydro year, and so we expect the hydro to have gone down this year. But geothermal has also decreased, but that was more than made up for by way more solar photovoltaics on the grid, more wind output. And so we saw a net increase of about 11 or 12% of total wind, water, solar this year versus the last year, due mostly to the growth in solar with some growth in wind, combined with the reduction of demand on the grid. Those two together allowed 100% renewables to be met on far more days and for many more hours. I mean, last year we did meet 100% renewables on around 48 days, but it was only for an average of about 1.3 or 4 hours a day. This year we're at 4.5 hours a day and for 98 days so far. And despite the fact we have much higher temperatures this year.
This is all really exciting. Can you put some of this, like where we are now in historical context? Like, what did California's grid look like 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago? And what are the big shifts that you've seen?
Well, yeah, first I'll start with what's happened just in 1 year. So the battery capacity on the grid has doubled in 1 year. So we have a peak output of 8 gigawatts on the grid. And to put that in perspective, on average, except for summer, the average output in California, the average power demand that is in California, except for summer, is on the order of 20 to 25 gigawatts. And we now have a peak battery output on the grid of 8 gigawatts. So that's around a third of the average demand on the grid could be met by peak batteries. And batteries are mostly 4-hour batteries, so they can output 8 gigawatts for 4 hours. So they're usually outputting after sunset and a little bit before sunrise as well. So they're charged often during the day with extra solar and wind, and then that extra solar and wind is then shifted to nighttime where it's released as battery output. There is some loss, about a 10 to 15% loss of electricity going in and out of batteries, but it's reducing the gas on the grid. So during spring, for example, there were 44 or over 40% reduction of the gas used compared with last year on the grid. And that's a big, so there's
Say
more.
that again and just explain, like, how big a shift is that?
Well, that's huge because right now, natural gas, or what we also call fossil gas, is the largest component, or one of the largest, well, it's the largest fossil component of grid electricity in California, and it's used to fill in the gaps when we don't have solar and wind. And to put everything in perspective, on average over the year in 2023, about 53% of California's grid electricity demand was met by just wind, water, and solar. It's again onshore wind, solar photovoltaics, and also concentrated solar power, geothermal, and small and large hydro. That's 53%. That's going to go up to around 60+% this year in 2024. But gas is most of the rest, and nuclear is a portion of it as well. So the rest, aside from wind, water, solar, is gas and nuclear, and then there's some imports, California imports as well. So the gas amount has been, let's say, I'm just saying maybe 30%. And that amount, though, this year during spring, compared to last year, the same days, this was about 40% lower. And so that's a big shift. That's a big drop because people have said, well, and that's in the presence of more wind, water, and solar. People have said, well, more wind, water, solar, it's intermittent, so you're going to need more gas. And in fact, we're displacing gas because we have batteries. The batteries have doubled in 1 year. Last year, right now we have about 8 gigawatts. Last year we had less, we had like 3.5 gigawatts. It's more than doubled at around the same time. And so we doubled the batteries. We've increased the solar, the utility scale solar 30%. In wind outputs increased 10%, and rooftop solar has also increased substantially in 1 year. And so all those factors have helped displace gas on the grid. So it's cleaner as well as more renewable now in the last year. Now, in comparison with like 5 years ago, 10 years ago, yeah, I mean, batteries didn't exist on the grid 10 years ago at all. And there was just tiny amounts until like 3 or 4 years ago. So batteries have just escalated almost exponentially, and they're being put up, more and more are being put up still. And in fact, there are 8 gigawatts on the CAISO grid, all of California. And if you include behind the meter batteries in people's homes, they're on the order of 12 gigawatts or so, and also on the rest of the grids in California. So the batteries have grown substantially. Utility solar is growing. What we need really because when we're meeting 100%, we're meeting it during the day. We're not meeting it at night yet. To meet it at night as well as day, what we need are a combination of a few factors. One is certainly more daytime solar plus batteries will help because the batteries will then shift the daytime solar to night. Offshore wind, California has the huge offshore wind resources. You can power the whole entire state with offshore wind in California. And that's starting to take hold, although it's going to be a few more years before we actually get some turbines offshore.
And can you just pause for a quick second and explain the role that offshore wind plays in terms of it being a complement to solar?
Right. Well, all the wind we have right now is onshore wind, and that wind actually peaks mostly at night. Onshore wind does. And so that's already a complement to solar, but there is daytime wind as well. So it's running 24/7. And and the wind is integrated over from different locations. So it's integrated on the grid over different locations. And when you connect geographically far apart wind farms, you smoothen out the overall supply. So although the wind output at one location is very intermittent, with one turbine at one location, very intermittent. When you look at the output from many turbines, you get less intermittency. When you interconnect wind farms that are far apart, and I say far apart, could be tens of kilometers to hundreds of kilometers to even 1,000 kilometers apart, you smoothen out the overall supply, because when the wind's not blowing in one place, it's often blowing somewhere else. It's always blowing somewhere.
Right.
And
An analogy would be like the stock market, right? Like any single stock might have oscillations, but overall the portfolio has a steady line.
exactly. So when we look at the data from California, we're seeing wind every single day, every hour of every day. I mean, we don't see any hour of any day that you don't have wind power output in California. In fact, you have quite a bit of wind output, and it's mostly at night. And so it's very complementary. Now, offshore to solar, which is only during the day, offshore wind is even better because it's even smoother in its output than onshore wind at one location. And it peaks in the late afternoon and early evening, and it peaks in the summer. So Cape Mendocino, which is one of the locations where we're going to have a lot of offshore wind installed, and rightly so, because that's actually the strongest winds in California, right off Cape Mendocino, Northern California. And those winds peak in the summer. The wind's output is double than any other season. So that's when we have the highest electricity demand, which is in the summer. So in California, we have relatively modest demand in winter, spring, and autumn, but summer just skyrockets because of air conditioning demand. And that's when offshore wind peaks. And it peaks not only in the summertime, which is the season of this highest demand, but also at the time of the highest demand, which is late afternoon, early evening. And that's when batteries are kicking in right now. And there's some solar left over from late afternoon. But the offshore wind will complement the rest of the grid, but it'll help fill in those gaps where we're not getting to 100% right now. Now, the other location where the offshore wind will be installed is off the coast of Central California. At least that's based on current plans. But the problem there, and the reason that's a good location, is not only the winds are pretty reasonable there offshore, but there's a huge transmission line to the coast. Now, unfortunately, that transmission line is being hogged by the remaining nuclear power plant in California, Diablo Canyon. And that is going to slow, because it's hogging that transmission line. There is still some capacity left on that transmission line. But because Diablo Canyon is hogging that line, it's going to reduce the growth of offshore wind off Central California, which is a shame, because offshore wind is, in the end, it's going to be much cheaper than Diablo Canyon, which is requiring about, some estimates, up to $12 billion in subsidies to stay open past 2025.
That's a big price tag.
Yeah. So,
Yep. How much of this growth has been driven just by improvements in technology and falling cost, and how much has been driven by policy from your perspective, and how are those things interconnected?
well, I think it's more the cost of existing technology has dropped substantially, and that's due to improvements in technology, subtle improvements, but also economies of scale, just the huge growth of solar on a worldwide scale, as well as batteries. The growth of battery usage has just dropped its cost. And so the cost of solar is really low. This cost of batteries is dropping rapidly and becoming really low. And that's all it is. It's no miracle here. There's no miracle technology that was developed. It's just subtle improvements in existing technologies and deployment on a large scale around the world, which has in turn dropped the price of these technologies.
Right.
And also the ability to install them. So governments obviously and policies have to play a role in terms of allowing these technologies to be installed and reducing the red tape in installing them.
Mhm. Great.
Mm.
I'm looking forward to Dan Jacobson, the other Jacobson, joining our conversation, just because he's been at the center of some of the policy debates. So he should be joining us in a couple of minutes. I know you're in California. A lot of your expertise is in California, but you cover this issue on a global basis. So to what extent do you see progress towards 100% renewable happening in other states? How many of those have committed to 100% targets similar to what California did? And I don't know how far behind other states how far behind California are other states, or are there some states that are maybe taking steps that California could learn from?
Yeah, good question. So actually, California, I would rank California as state number 11 in terms of its penetration of wind, water, solar in the annual average, because South Dakota, for example, in the last 4 quarters, so a full year from second quarter of 2023 through the first quarter of 2024, it met 99.5% of its demand effectively with just wind, water, and solar. So in other words, it had a certain amount of demand, and of that demand, it supplied 99.5% of it with just actually wind and hydropower. In fact, it was about 72% wind and 27% hydropower, with like a 0.5% of solar. And then that's not all. Montana met 81.5% of its demand with wind, water, solar. Iowa met 80%. Washington State met 78%. Kansas met 67%. Oregon met 67%. Maine met 62.5%. New Mexico 62.5%. Oklahoma 56.5%. Wyoming 56.3%. And then California was 54.4%, followed by North Dakota 54.3%. So there is a huge progress, and this is just wind, water, solar. So that's wind, onshore wind, because nobody really has offshore now. There is some offshore in the East Coast, hydropower, geothermal, and solar, and that includes rooftop solar as well. But so there is the progress in states, especially those dominated by wind, because of the top 12 states, 7 are dominated by wind. Only 1, California, is dominated by solar, and the rest are dominated by hydropower. Now, the interesting thing is, because people complain that, well, not complain, it's rightly so, that California has high electricity prices. And it's true that California has the second highest electricity prices now, behind Hawaii. But it's clear that this has nothing to do with the growth of renewables in California. And that's evidenced by 2 factors. One is just, if you look at the states ahead of California in terms of their penetration of wind, water, solar, well, of those states, like South Dakota, it has the 9th lowest, has 99.5% wind, water, solar. It has the 9th lowest electricity price in the United States. Montana, which is number 2, has the 8th lowest. Iowa has the 12th lowest. Washington State has the 6th lowest. Kansas the 17th. Oregon the 19th. Maine is the one outlier. It's 42, almost like California. But New Mexico is 10th. Oklahoma is 7th. Wyoming is 5th. And North Dakota has the lowest electricity price in the United States. So of the 12 states with the highest fraction of their electricity from wind, water, and solar, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of them are in the lowest 10 cost states, and 10 of them are in the lowest 19th cost states. So there's no correlation. In fact, when you look at those states with high fractions of their electricity supplied by wind, water, solar, there's no correlation with higher electricity prices. In fact, it's the opposite correlation. It lowers their prices. So I will posit that without the growth of wind, water, solar in California, California would have even higher prices. But there's a reason California has high electricity prices, for multiple reasons. Well, one is that it does use a lot of gas still, and gas in California is California has the third highest fossil gas prices in the United States. Also, there have been fires caused by transmission line sparks that there are huge penalties, a huge damage it's caused in multiple years, and the damages that utilities have had to pay have been transferred to customers. As a result of the fires, utilities have to underground lines, and that's being transferred to the customers. There were gas disasters in San Bruno and Aliso Canyon that that utilities had to pay fines, and there was huge damages and light lawsuits, and those costs are being passed on to customers. In addition, as a result of particularly the San Bruno gas disaster, underground pipes for gas lines had to be strengthened, and so that was a huge process that's still going on, and all those costs are being passed on to customers. So the cost of fires, gas disasters, and gas prices are being translated to higher electricity prices for those in California.
Right.
But just one more point.
You hear the argument that somehow renewables are leading to this, when you're saying, if you actually look at the data, if anything, renewables are reducing costs on the grid. Who do you see making those arguments, and do you see them gaining traction?
Well, I mean, the people making the arguments are those who are against renewables. So usually the gas industry people and their people who peddle their information. And, there are a lot of people who are just skeptical about renewables. It's sometimes it's political skepticism. Sometimes it's because they're usually promoting some other energy technology. Usually it's nuclear supporters or gas supporters, or in some states, coal supporters are saying that. So it's, the general fossil fuel industry supporters. I mean, there's a lot of competition in the energy field for among different technologies. And some people support, there's a lot of fossil fuel supporters, and they'll support technologies like carbon capture, direct air capture, blue hydrogen, electrofuels, and they'll push these as solutions rather than renewables. But in fact, those are non-solutions. But you'll have people then trying to take advantage of anything they can to say that renewables are going to cause damage. Like if you see high electricity prices in California and you also see high renewable penetrations, then it's easy to try to point to that. In Texas, they do the same thing. That when there was a blackout, they said, "Oh, it must be renewables on the grid," although it proved that had nothing to do with it. It was mostly gas lines being frozen. So this is pretty normal for me to I see these critics all over the place that and I think more and more of them they're becoming automated through artificial intelligence. But it is frustrating, but you just have to kind of deal with them and encounter them with facts and data.
Right. What do you see as the most important things that California leaders need to do next? So, heard you talk about that offshore wind has a larger role to play, that we definitely need more solar and storage so we can get to 100% renewable 24/7. But can you just talk about, what might the next few years look like, and what are the things that need to be prioritized?
Well, first is to change back, because last year there was a change in the law for rooftop solar, the net metering law, that made it more difficult and more expensive for new customers to install a rooftop solar. So that needs to be rolled back. That change needs to be rolled back because it killed the solar industry, the rooftop solar industry, that is, in California. I think it was like 80 to 90% of the installers went out of business. And it's just completely counterproductive. And it was based on misinformation about the benefits of rooftop solar. And it is such a benefit to have rooftop solar because not only does it decrease the demand for grid electricity, which allows the grid to stay stable a lot easier. It lowers the cost of energy for everybody. And it also reduces the risk of wildfires because you have less transmission lines that you need. Rooftop solar reduces the need for transmission lines. It allows people to provide their own energy in a blackout, if there is a blackout. It allows people to avoid high costs of electricity when they do occur in the afternoons, because it allows people to produce their own electricity in the afternoons. And if they have batteries, they can then produce it in the evenings, also when you have high costs of electricity. So these should be encouraged to the maximum. And also, you don't need as much land to put utility scale solar. I mean, we're going to need both utility scale solar and rooftop solar to solve 100% renewables across all energy sectors in all states and countries. Now, one of the arguments that utilities make is that, oh, well, the rooftop solar eats into the demand for electricity, and so that makes it more expensive for everybody else. And that's a completely nonsensical argument, because as we go forward, we're electrifying all energy. We're electrifying transportation, we're electrifying industry, we're electrifying buildings. And even though electricity, fortunately, is much more efficient than combustion, so that will, if we compare the overall demand across all energy sectors today versus with an electrified world, the electrified world will reduce overall demand by on the order of 40 to 45%, which is good. But all that new electricity, all that new energy, or all the remaining energy will be electricity. Right now, 20% of all the end use energy is electricity. But we're going to reduce demand by 45%, but all the remaining energy will be electricity. So we're going to more than double the electricity demand, even though we're reducing overall energy demand. And so even if rooftop solar supplied a third of that additional of the total demand in the future, we're still going to have more demand for electricity than today. So utilities have nothing to fear about rooftop solar cutting into demand, because we have so much more demand for electricity due to electrifying transportation, buildings, and industry. And so it's only a win-win situation to have rooftop solar supply portion of the demand. The other policies, as I mentioned, is we want more offshore wind, but also more utility solar as well, plus batteries, to shift more hydro to nighttime, conventional hydro. It's because we just need to fill in gaps at night, and using more demand response, which is where utilities give people incentives to shift the time of their electricity demand. I mean, you wouldn't believe it, but the most expensive PG&E, for example, I don't know, I would say doubled, but really significantly increased their price of electricity. But especially between 4 and 9 p.m., it's like 60 cents a kilowatt hour now. But, I don't know what sunset's like 8 p.m. or something for right now, but it's say 4 to 8 p.m. You've got solar on the grid. We have more than 100% renewable on the grid. Why are you charging 60 cents a kilowatt hour when the grid is being supplied with 100% wind, water, solar, which is sometimes 90% solar, which is only 3 or 4 cents a kilowatt hour? So they're charging 60 cents a kilowatt hour for 3 to 4 cents a kilowatt hour electricity. And, but the price of electricity, we're having excess electricity during the day, and that's during the day is when they should have the minimum price of electricity. And oops, you're on mute.
Thank you. Sorry. I want to pause for just 1 second and welcome Dan Jacobson, our other Jacobson, to the conversation. Dan's a senior advisor for Environment California and has been working on energy policy and strategic campaigns in California for more than 2 decades. So Dan, welcome to the conversation. We've been talking a lot about, what has led to California being on the cusp of this historic milestone where 100% renewable energy is powering a portion of the state for, a set amount of time every day. I'd love, given your background and your history, can you just talk a little bit about how you see the story of how we got here?
Yeah, first of all, thanks. Sorry I'm late. And Brother Jacobson, obviously it's great to see you again. There's three of us. There's actually three Jacobsons that have been doing a lot on offshore wind. Professor Jacobson, Arnie Jacobson at the Schatz Center at now Cal Poly Humboldt, who's really one of the world leaders on offshore wind and sort of looking at that. I don't put myself in their category, but really glad to be part of that Jacobson trio. I feel like our name is doing a lot on renewable energy, so doing everything we can. But to answer your question, I was looking back at 1999, 2000, when we had the rolling blackouts, and the response from the governor's office, it was horrible time in California, that we had raging wildfires, we had massive energy price spikes. People that had done the deregulation law in 1996 were being literally run out of restaurants in their district and told, you're the worst person. We can't believe you did this, especially down in San Diego, where prices were just out of control. And the legislature had to act. They had to do something. And sort of the governor had to have a plan. Their initial plan was to build 60 new fossil fuel power plants. And we were kind of like, that sort of doubling down on the problem that got us here is going to make the next problem twice as worse. What can we do to sort of create a new kind of paradigm and thinking? And Professor, I don't know if you remember this, but we invited you and you came to an economist forum that we held in 2001 in Sacramento that was dedicated specifically to having professors, experts in the field, who would give the legislators calm when we were talking about renewable energy, and that this could be done, that we could power our economy with a percentage of renewable electricity. At the time, we were talking about 20% renewable energy by 2020. And, lo and behold, we were able to get the political winds to sort of line up. And we had support from labor unions and economists and sort of experts, and not many in the business world. And the utilities were sort of begrudgingly like, well, we don't know about this. But it passed, and Governor Gray Davis then signed that bill, which was the first in California renewable portfolio standard. Again, we had taken this idea from other states and other places around the country, similar to what we did with million solar roofs. But this idea came into fruition. And Professor, I don't know if we have graduate students who can go back and look at the first contract that was signed when the RPS was done, but it would have been like right around 2002 or 2003, when all of a sudden the first utility would have signed a contract to meet their RPS requirements. And since then, as has been well documented, the price of renewable energy has gone down significantly. And it's because we've seen some of that from the RPS and some from other factors. The other one that helped drive down the price of solar, as everyone on this call knows, is the Million Solar Roofs initiative, where again, we were able to organize inside the Capitol politically enough support for people to get this concept that supply and demand could work if we did that through rooftop solar. And so it was those two combinations which have really proven to be unbelievably successful. We passed then now 4 or 5 other RPS bills that get us to 33% to 50% to 100%. And then 2 years ago, we passed a bill that said, don't wait to get from 2030 to 2045, but we set up the benchmarks that said by 2035, we have to be at 90%, which does seem like in 11 years, we're going to be at 90%, which is a unbelievably good number. And then by 2040, we have to be at 95%. So setting up those benchmarks so that we weren't waiting until 2044 and then looking around and saying, oh, geez, we're still at 60%. What are we going to do? Obviously, that wouldn't have happened. But, being able to set those benchmarks, I think, makes a lot of sense. And so to me, the combination of the renewable portfolio standard, the Million Solar Roofs, 2 programs have not only driven down California's carbon use in the energy or power sector, but have also been saving our tuchus, as the professor notes, almost every day on Twitter, in terms of price and reliability. And so it's being able to look at those things and look then at how we've been successful, but it's really been a combination of, not being very dogmatic about it, creating a wide tent so that we got voices from everywhere to be able to come in and to talk about this, and to not sort of demonize people, even if they weren't our friends in the beginning of this issue. And especially with clean energy, sometimes we're friends with people on one particular issue like offshore wind, but we don't get along with them on rooftop solar. And instead of just saying, oh, we can never talk to you because you don't support one or the other, just saying we're going to have to take this, I would argue, and Professor, I don't know if we're on the same page as this, but sort of in an incremental, like each year we have to pass a new set of laws and a new set of programs that gets us as far as we possibly can, implement those, and then come back again. And it's mostly because the legislature and the governor are just not in a place where they'll do everything we tell them to do. And so we have to piecemeal it out for them.
Yeah.
You're on mute, Johan.
Sorry. I'm thrilled also that Stephen has joined the conversation, because Dan, we heard you say, every year there needs to be more policy to help keep the state pointed in this direction. What are some of the big priorities right now? And what are things that, members of the public can do to help support that movement?
Yeah, I'd be happy to highlight some of the key, key areas that we can make a lot of progress on this year. And I'd love for Dan and Dr. Jacobson to jump in as well when I'm done. But yeah, I think Dr. Jacobson kind of covered rooftop solar really well. I mean, one of the first things that we should do is make sure that rooftop solar continues to grow quickly and sustainably like it has over the last couple decades. But, unfortunately, it's been, it's been stalled out a bit over the last year or so. This rooftop solar has really been this major workhorse in our clean energy transition so far. And we know that we need a lot more of it, especially paired with batteries, so that we can meet our growing electricity demand and, actually reduce demand, so that those peaks aren't as high. But yeah, despite all of our rooftop solar progress, we've still only taken advantage of about 10% of our rooftop solar potential in California. So, we still have a lot more potential to take advantage of, catching the sun's rays from rooftops all over our state. And there's one particular bill this year that would really make a significant step in helping continue to keep solar growing in California. Senate Bill 1374, authored by Senator Becker, is a bill that would give buildings like schools and apartment buildings the right to use their own solar energy that they generate on their rooftops or on their parking lots, for example. This bill, this right was actually taken away from these buildings in a recent decision from the California Public Utilities Commission. And it really, harms the ability of rooftop solar to pencil out for these kinds of community buildings, which we all think should be able to go solar to generate clean energy and save money on their utility bills. Buildings like schools and apartment buildings, so that we can really expand the benefits of rooftop solar energy to everyone. So yeah, we think that legislators should pass SB 1374 this year. To help schools, apartments, and community buildings go solar by, allowing them to use their energy on site to help save more on their bills. The second really big thing that's just kind of emerged, that was just passed by the state legislature and signed into law, is a $10 billion climate bond. So that's something that's going to be on the ballot in November for voters. They'll have the opportunity to vote for $10 billion for a whole array of really important environmental and climate priorities. But I'll highlight some of the clean energy priorities that are included in the bond. There's actually hundreds of millions of dollars that would go towards clean energy projects like we've talked about here. So a really big chunk to offshore wind infrastructure to really help set the stage for this this new emerging industry that's going to help generate so much of the renewable energy that we need. So hundreds of millions for offshore wind infrastructure, particularly at our ports, to make sure that those are ready to handle offshore wind development in the coming decades. And also it includes hundreds of millions for clean energy transmission projects to make sure that clean energy can get to where it's needed within the state with a particular focus on these technologies known as grid enhancing technologies that can actually increase the capacity of our electric grid and allow us to connect more renewable resources to the grid faster and cheaper and easier. And then I'll note the last clean energy part that's included in the bond is for battery storage technologies. So getting more batteries out there, like we've talked about how those are so important to helping us meet our energy needs at all hours of the day. So some really, really important opportunities in the climate bond, if that voters have the opportunity to vote on this November. And the last thing I'll mention really briefly, there's also a really important package of bills to help increase our transmission capacity in California and to really unlock the grid or really increase the capacity of our electric grid and our existing infrastructure so that we can connect more renewable energy resources faster and really do that in the most cost-effective way possible. So there's a package of bills, including SB 1006 by Senator Padilla, AB 3246 by Assemblymember Garcia, and AB 2779 by Assemblymember Petrie Norris. These are all bills that collectively advance these cost-effective upgrades that help boost our clean energy transition with more efficient and more effective transmission capacity. So yeah, those are some of the near-term opportunities we have that I'd like to highlight. And yeah, if I missed any upcoming opportunities, would welcome the other panelists to jump in.
Well,
Professor
I'll just
Jacobson.
add that I was just going to add that for electricity, California is really doing well in terms of transitioning, and it's kind of has its own momentum to get to 100%. But really what we also need is transitioning the other energy sectors, so transportation, buildings, and industry primarily. And so we need similar renewable portfolio standards and timelines to transition those sectors. Because electricity right now is only 20% of all the end use energy. So these other sectors result in a lot of emissions, but also energy use, and could be more efficient, and we could eliminate those emissions if we actually are aggressive in those sectors. So I'd add those as goals in the near term to transition those other energy sectors.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, the only point I would add is that today, this month, is going to be important for offshore wind, as you've been noting, Professor. First is today, the California Energy Commission will vote to approve their strategic plan for offshore wind, the AB 525 report. That should happen in about 10 minutes, or assuming they're a little late getting started, 15 minutes, so almost right away. Support's been almost universal for that, coming in from labor unions, businesses, and environmental groups, environmental justice groups, who all see that benefit. Later this month, there will be a proposed decision coming out of the California Public Utilities Commission that's very important, that sort of sets the stage for how much offshore wind should the state be ready to purchase. And a bigger number helps to accelerate offshore wind significantly faster. So if the state sets a very low number, then there's not a lot of investment that comes into the state, and people tend to sort of think, oh, this is still nascent and sort of not ready. But if the state and the PUC sets a higher number, then that'll encourage more growth and faster growth into the state for offshore wind. And as I'm sure has been noted before I got here, offshore wind is good because it blows best when we need it the most. So.
Great. Well, Stephen, I think we should go ahead and turn it over to our audience. So Professor Jacobson and Dan, thank you again so much for joining us to celebrate this milestone. And we're gonna open it up and field some of the questions from our attendees.
Yeah, that sounds great. We've got a few questions lined up here that have been flagged for us. So I'll read the first question. This is for Mark from Andrea. So she says, in today's LA Times, LADWP's ratepayer advocate says we have to delay our deadline of 2035 to go 100% renewable energy because technology is changing and it would be too expensive. So what would you say to him?
Well, as I was pointing out during the talk, more renewable energy reduces the cost, as you see by all the states with higher fractions of their electricity from wind, water, and solar. I mean, South Dakota is the best examples, has 99.5% of its demand in the last 4 quarters has been met with effectively with just wind and hydropower, and it's has among the lowest prices of electricity in the United States. Same with among the 12 states with the highest fractions of their electricity from wind, water, solar. All but California and Maine have low electricity prices. So it's just not true in my mind that more renewables means higher prices. It's quite the opposite, and that renewables are keeping the prices lower than they would otherwise be. We really need to focus on why California has high electricity prices, and that's because utilities are passing on the costs of wildfires, gas leaks, strengthening gas lines, strengthening transmission lines, burying them, and also the fact that we have high gas prices. And so the less gas we use in the state, the lower our electricity prices will be.
I think that's a fantastic point. Yeah, thanks for your response there, Mark. Here's another question I can start off by directing to Dan. So this is from Charisse. She's saying, in reference to the CEC meeting that you talked about, where they're going to vote on the offshore wind strategic plan. She's asking, what do you think are the biggest hurdles that need to be accomplished in order for more people to approve of offshore wind? She's noting that there's a few people who are against offshore wind.
Yeah, I mean, in some cases, more than a few. But I think one of the key things that we need is making sure that there's transparency in the process that's happening, so everyone can be aware of sort of when critical decisions are being made. 2 is, I think we need to continue to do the science to make sure that we're protecting the ocean. We don't want to take this opportunity and put the windmills in a place where it would be the one bad place in the ocean to put them. But with monitoring and science and different coordination from different state agencies and federal agencies, and again, the work our cousin Arnie Jacobson is doing up at Cal Poly, we really have an opportunity to put the windmills in a place where we can do it safely, where they can generate gigawatts of electricity, and where that gigawatts of electricity can be used exactly when the sun is going down. The best part about the offshore wind is, as I was saying, it blows best when we need it the most. But years and decades of study have shown that the wind is blowing at its strongest point as the sun is going down on summer and winter days. And so just when we would normally be right now cranking up the fossil fuel power plants, instead we can tap into that offshore wind. And so we can get ourselves off of that and continue to charge batteries, continue to do that. We need the different portfolio, that we need a really diverse portfolio to be able to take advantage of the different sectors when they peak. We get the sun in the daytime, obviously. We get the offshore wind as the sun is going down. We get batteries and hydropower as we get later on into the evening. And then as we come back into the morning, we tap back into the sun. That kind of diversity is the strength of what we should be looking for in a grid. And for offshore wind, we need to make sure that stakeholders are engaged and that we're really sort of doing it right by bringing everybody to the table and making things transparent and doing the science to get it right.
Thanks, Dan. I think you make a great case for offshore wind and all of its incredible benefits. And yeah, why don't we we'll probably have time for one more good question here. So this one is from Cynthia. Cynthia is asking, how are California resource adequacy requirements affecting the cost of renewables and storage to utility companies? Would anyone on the panel like to speak to California's resource adequacy requirements?
Well, I would say like batteries are the best backup possible in terms of, just in terms of response time. Like a battery, like gas takes 5 minutes for 100% backup. And in other words, like if you have a background gas, if you have a gas plant that's waiting around for the sun to stop shining or wind to stop blowing, it takes 5 minutes for it to get to 100% ramp up, or 20% a minute. But batteries take 20 milliseconds to go to 100%. Hydropower takes 15 seconds to get to 100%. So hydropower is really good backup. It's even better than gas. batteries are even better. So there was a study in Australia when the first big battery was added in Australia, they found that it saved compared with the normal gas backup. It was like $20 million within the first several months, due to the fact that it was just so much more effective. In fact, it was faster in terms of responding to a load. So the more batteries we have, that's going to help. And the hydro, using the existing hydro, we're not proposing to increase hydro, but using existing hydro to the extent we can as for backup instead of base load is also good, because it's a really nice backup, just like batteries are. And basically hydro is a big battery, I mean, conventional hydro. So combining batteries with hydro as a backup, using solar, wind when they're available, and geothermal is pretty base load, that gets us to meeting minute by minute, second by second power demand reliably at low cost, because battery costs are now down to like $65 a kilowatt hour of storage, which, you know, they were hundreds of dollars. They were in fact $1,000 a kilowatt hour of storage just 5 years ago. And you know, when they're down to $50 or less, that is like you can replace all gas on the grid. It's just become so cheap. And in fact, there's some batteries, certain types of batteries now, like iron air, some people claim they're like $5 a kilowatt hour of storage for it. So grid storage we can almost get to the point where we need no more gas on the grid, and it'll be much more reliable and cheaper.
Thanks so much, Dr. Jacobson. Yeah, great points, I think. Well, yeah, that brings us to the top of the hour here. So I just wanted to thank the audience and all the attendees who showed up here to listen to this great conversation, and also send a special thank you to Dr. Jacobson, and also Dan Jacobson, who joined us as our fantastic panelists here. And yeah, thanks again for this robust discussion on California's renewable energy progress, and not only what we've done so far, but how we can keep making progress and keep achieving this this vision of 100% renewable energy 24/7 every single day of the year. You know, we have the technologies to do this. We really just need the will to keep making progress and to keep doing it quickly, especially in the light of these climate change impacts that we're experiencing, like this extreme weather we've had the last week. So thank you everyone for joining, and let's keep renewables rising and continue quickly down the road to 100% renewable energy.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you very much.